If you've been listening for a little while, you might remember the conversation with Judah Veitel from at the time he was with Nordic Naturals, where we did like a complete overview. I call it the Omega for Dummies episode because really for me, he just broke down omegas in a way that I had not really learned before. So we talked about what EPA and DHA are, why quality and processing matter, how to actually choose a fish oil instead of just grabbing the prettiest label off of the shelf. That episode was more of a foundations class. Think of today's episode as like the lab component because now we're talking a little bit more about numbers, testing, and real world impact. So I had my labs done last November and I did a lot of lab work. I had a ton of blood taken from me. I don't know if I've actually said this on the podcast before or not. Maybe talking to a guest, I crashed really, really hard after having all of that blood drawn because I actually found out like my ferritin was in the basement, was below the basement, was like in the ground underneath the basement. But the reason I bring that up is because my omegas were a little bit low. Even though I was taking a quality fish oil supplement, I wasn't super strict about taking it. I took it kind of here and there, or I had been kind of taking it here and there. Things just kind of slipped a little bit for me, honestly, for probably the past 6 months, and I am feeling it. So, one of the key components that I am taking more seriously in my supplement stack moving forward, and what I'm giving to my pets moving forward is a high quality omega-3 supplement. And some of what we're going to talk about today is going to kind of illuminate how we can know and why this is so important. So it's it's very, very important in today's society, especially because we are inundated with omega 6s. And omega 6s aren't the devil, right? We still do need them, but we have them so far out of proportion to the omega 3 ratio that we're getting that we have so much inflammation in our bodies. And the same is true of our pets, especially for those pets that are eating highly ultra processed foods like a kibble or anything high heat processed really. But I say kibble especially because there's just so much of that in the world where pets are being fed kibble that is high heat processed, that is ultra processed, that is really incredibly gross rendered 4D meat ingredients, really, really, really nasty stuff. So the omega 6s are so far out of proportion. Just to kind of give you an idea, we're looking for like a 1 to 4 to a 1 to, depending on who you talk to, a 1 to 4 ratio is great for omega 3s to omega 6s for dogs and cats. AFCO lets you have it at like a 1 to 40 ratio. It can be really, really bad. And it's not really even a a nutrient that is tracked well. Like you're not seeing that on the labels. So our animals have the same patterns going on that we do, in some cases even worse. Highly processed kibble and treats. They're made with really cheap fats, poor quality oils, very little truly bioavailable omega 3s. So this is where testing becomes really powerful. Kim's over here shaking if you heard her. Instead of guessing, I eat pretty healthy. My pet eats pretty healthy. My dog's food says it has omega 3s in it. We can actually test this and see what's going on inside of our pet's body. Actually, our body as well. So, most omega 3 tests are a simple finger prick blood test. You put a couple of drops on a card, send it to the lab, and they measure either your omega 3 index, basically the percentage of EPA to DHA in your red blood cell membranes, or they can calculate your omega 6 to omega 3 ratio from your blood fatty acids. We're going to talk a little bit more about now. Riley's acting up. I'm sure you can hear him. I just fed him, so I'm sure he's okay. He's just got the zoomies, I think. So OmegaQuant actually has a bit of a different test. We're going to talk about that today in today's episode. And you're probably already noticing today's episode is a little bit different. It's not a completely solo episode. I did record with Tavis from OmegaQuant, but I lost some of that footage, some of his footage specifically. And so I'm taking what I have instead of panicking because old me would have panicked. I'm taking what I have. We're going to create a really incredible follow up episode. And I also want you to know that I have plans to record with a woman who co-authored the book called The Truth About Seed Oils. So we're going to continue this conversation, but on omega-6s in general, omega-3s, omega-6s, what it does in your body. We're going to continue this conversation, but today we are going to focus a little bit more on testing. So I am very much of the belief test, don't guess in any situation possible. So the truth is that we can do a lot with omega-3s. And as a pet health coach, I learned so much more about omega, like the importance of supplementing omega-3s and proper supplementation of omega-3s. That episode with Judah Veitel, which I will be linking that in the show notes because that was just like chef's kiss of an episode. I will forever, I think that will be one of my favorite episodes because I learned so much about actually understanding what omega-3s are, why they're so important to the body, and how to choose one. Because that, I think, even people that know and understand, I mean, we go to the vet all the time, and the vet says, oh, yeah, also, by the way, your dog should have more omega-3s in their diet. Great, but then they don't instruct us on which ones to give. So after I bring in the edited pieces from Tavis with OmegaQuant, at the end of this episode, I'm going to talk a little bit about how like I rank omega-3s, what is going to be the best way to get them in your pet, and we'll just kind of go from there. So one of the reasons that I really, really love testing, and yes, today we're talking about omega-3 testing with OmegaQuant, but I like testing in general, is that it exposes the gap between intention and reality. We all have good intentions, but the reality of what we're doing may not actually be what we're doing. I actually recorded an episode for the Love Your Dogs podcast with Bree Drake. So I'm not sure if you've heard that episode, but we did talk a lot about testing and the bioenergetics test at Wild Wellness Pet and the intention behind all of it and how the reality of what we're doing may not actually be matching, not always because we're missing the mark. In fact, I talked a little bit about how the glyphosate exposure, if we have too much of that toxin, that chemical built up in our bodies, it's actually going to bind to certain minerals in the body. So we could have mineral deficiencies, not because the diet is deficient, but because there's something else in the body that is binding to these nutrients that are not allowing them to be bioavailable for our bodies, for our cells to use. So it's not always, yeah, we have really great intention and we're feeding an amazing diet to our dog. But at the end of the day, there could be other factors that we need to know about that we might not know about unless we're testing. So I do want to say really quickly up front, I'm not here saying go mega dose a whole bunch of fish oil forever and ignore everything else. No. Always look at the animal in front of you. Use testing to help us determine what the next best move is. And no, you don't need to be testing every month, maybe every 6 months, maybe every year, depending on your situation. It's not, fortunately, the OmegaQuant test is not an expensive test. It is one that you do take to your veterinarian's office to get the blood draw for. We'll talk about that with Tavis. But in today's episode, again, we are going to talk about omega-3 testing, what the test can and can't tell you, how to interpret the numbers in context, and how you might start shifting that ratio for yourself and for your animals. So if you haven't already listened to the Judah Veitel Nordic Naturals conversation on omega-3s for dummies, or at least that's what I call it. That isn't the actual title of it, but that's how I refer to it. I highly recommend going back to that one as a companion episode, especially if you're wondering, like, how the heck do I choose a fish oil? Well, again, I will give you a little bit of an update on that at the end of today's episode for how I choose. So for now, what I want you to do is think about this question as you're listening to the rest of today's episode. If we actually measured your biology or your dog's biology, what story would your omega 3 index and your omega 6 to omega 3 ratio tell us? And are you willing to get curious enough to find out instead of just assuming? All right, let's get into today's episode. Tavis Piatoly from OmegaQuant. And by the way, the OmegaQuant test kit is available for purchase at Wild Wellness Pet. If you are following me on Instagram, the Wild Wellness Pet Instagram page, I do every once in a while post discount codes in the stories of that Instagram page. So make sure to be following there. And every once in a while, if you're on my email list, I'll send discount codes there as well. This is a new thing that I have started doing for those people who are like my ride or die. You're always there. You're getting my emails. You're reading my emails. You're looking at my stories because you're following me on social media, like the people that are here for it. So with that, let's get into today's episode with Tavis from OmegaQuant. Welcome to the Pet Parenting Reset podcast. If you're new here, my name is Jess, and this is a space where we talk about all things health span and quality of life for your pets and you too. I'm so excited that you're here. Let's dive in. Welcome back, pet parent. So one of the things we talk so much about nutrition, you know this, and one of the things that I am honestly still struggling a little bit to wrap my head around is how we look at omega-3s as supplementation when it really should be part of our diets. But to be fair, it's getting harder and harder and harder to find enough omega-3 in our diets to counteract the omega-6s in our diets. This is true for us. This is true for our pets. And omega-6s are not the devil, but we do have to keep everything in balance in our body. And if you remember back to when we had the like Omegas 101 for Dummies with Judah, that was one of my favorite episodes ever. And so we're doing a follow-up to that today with Tavis Piatoly. He is with OmegaQuant. And so we're going to be talking today about actually testing omegas. So Tavis, first of all, welcome to the Pet Parenting Reset. Thank you for being here.
Jess, thank you so much for having me. Really, really honored to be here.
So thank you again. And one of the things that I know you focus very heavily on the human side and sports medicine and things like that. Can you just kind of wrap it all up for us really quickly going into this as to like why omega-3s are so important?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And I think omega-3s is probably top 3 nutrients when you come to versatility. But it's 90% of people have low levels. Like it's not a nutrient that we think about, or it's not a sexy nutrient in the world of, I guess, testing because it's still fairly new. We know a lot about vitamin D. People want to get B vitamins or they want to go to IV clinics and get B12 because of whatever reason they think they need like instant amounts or vitamin C, right? Those are the nutrients that have had probably the most attention over the last 20, 30, 50 years because those nutrients have a direct probably side effect from a deficiency. With omega-3, you could walk around with low levels and you would not know that because you don't have signs and symptoms. So, but why are they important? The versatility. They have so many benefits when we optimize levels in the blood. Most people are just like, yeah, I take fish oil. And that's really, we don't know if that's working because are you taking enough? In many cases, I see people buying fish oil they bought from a local pharmacy, a grocery store, a big box store, and it's mostly heavily processed oil, not enough EPA and DHA, and they still have levels really low. So when you optimize blood levels in optimal ranges are 8 to 12%, the average American has 4 to 5% levels. You have lower risk for cardiovascular disease, 35% lower risk for coronary heart disease. Your risk for sudden cardiac death or primary heart attack drops quite significantly. We've seen from our lab Telomeres. Telomeres are basically your DNA chromosomes. As we get older, they shorten and they shorten and they shorten. Or if you smoke cigarettes, if you don't exercise, poor diet, inhaling a lot of chemicals, then they shorten faster. People who smoke, those things really shorten. But when you consume omega-3, it inhibits them from shortening. So they shorten at a very slow pace. What does that mean? That means you just age much slower. We have good research to show about a 30 to 40% slower rate of telomere shortening. And then the brain ages much slower. We're working on some research now, clinical trials on looking at omega-3 and dementia, not prevention, but just slowing the onset. But we already have good studies at higher blood omega-3 levels, less inflammation in animals and dogs and cats. I mean, we've got studies to show maybe less arthritis and less joint pain in dogs. That's some of the research I've seen there. In adults, it's less inflammatory markers like high sensitivity CRP, interleukin 6, tumor necrosis factor are blood markers that show high inflammatory response. When omega 3s are higher in the blood, you have less inflammatory response. And as you mentioned earlier, that omega 6, right? Not all omega 6s, or as the world of influencers want to call them, seed oils, we call them omega 6 fats. Not all of them, and there are 7 of them, they're not all inflammatory. What's the problem we see is when you have low blood omega-3 levels, you have high 6 to 3, and you have high arachidonic acid, which is an omega-6 fat, to EPA. EPA is an omega-3. So if you have high arachidonic to EPA levels, then you probably have a little bit more inflammation. But when you have high blood omega-3, it's like a seesaw effect. As omega-3 goes up, the ratios always go down into a healthy balance. So if we would just focus all that negative energy on omega-6 to say consume more omega-3 and optimize your levels, you would not have an inflammatory issue.
That's so interesting, especially I mean, the reality of, we're in the United States, right? And we things are so bad here that, like, our diet is named the standard American diet because it
Yeah.
is so inflammatory. It is so highly processed, generally speaking, that's not everything we eat, but and it certainly doesn't have to be completely erased from our diets, but eh, we should be eating, like, lower processed foods. They are gonna be healthier for us, more nutritious for us. They're gonna have, lower inflammatory, generally speaking. And it's the same for our pets. They have a standard American diet too, where, that it is ultra processed. It is the fats are like, let's just be real. By the time you get that kibble product to your door, the fats are probably rancid. And if they're not, they're gonna go rancid really quickly.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things that I talked to Judah about that I found so interesting is that what his opinion is that it would be better to not take a any sort of oil, whether it's a fish oil or a seed oil, like, whatever kind of oil, it would be better to not take it than to take a rancid one because it's doing so much more like, it's doing the opposite of what you think you're doing to your body.
Well, and I can only speak, and Dr. Harris can obviously probably talk a lot more about this study than I can because I heard of him talk about a study on oxidized omega 6s. So what they did was,
Mhm.
you don't want to, you never add, the more you add oxygen to any oil, 6, 3 with 9, it's going to oxidize, right?
Yeah.
If you have a bottle of high quality, pure omega-3 fish oil, and there's a lot of great oil companies out there, and you add a pump to it and you push oxygen, it's going to oxidize.
Mhm.
But there was a study done, and I don't know the specifics of, I can't break it down like he did, but he said they took like omega-6 oils and they really increased the oxidation on purpose. And what they did was they gave these to humans. I think it was a study in Europe that was done. They wanted to see, does oxidized oil impact blood markers of the inflammatory response? And initially the answer was no. They oxidized these things for like I think 24 hours. Again, I'm probably wrong. And then they fed them to the individual. They had them consume these highly oxidized omega-6 fats. They measured inflammatory markers. Now, again, I don't know if this was done for a month, a week. I don't remember the exact specifics, but the blood level showed no impact on inflammatory response. So I think the inflammatory response for these types of oils is not like an acute thing. You just don't like eat them because I live in
Mhm.
Louisiana, right? We're known for fried seafood. They're cooking
Yeah.
shrimp and catfish, and they're breading them and putting them in peanut oil and soy, whatever, vegetable oils. And then we're like, yeah, you combine that with French fries and hush puppies, and it's basically an inflammatory, but that one meal is probably not going to be why that person gets sick. It's going to be years of consuming the same type of diet. Saturated fat, believe it or not, heavy amounts of saturated fat can also be incredibly pro-inflammatory. People on keto diets, it's like, oh, they just think they can eat all the butter, bacon, and cheese they want. That's not a really smart approach, because if you look at hepatic liver function and the size of the liver on those heavy saturated fat diets, liver inflammation or liver hypertrophy and CRP levels all go up. So we need probably a lot more balance of three monounsats like the avocados, the olive oils. What we don't know from our lab is we study monounsaturated fats, but it's not one we look at those individual monos. We're looking at the threes and the sixes more than anything else.
So, kind of the bottom line, going back to how you started the conversation, is that getting these optimum levels of omega 3s is going to be really, really important for humans and for pets. And we were talking earlier, like you work with horses as well. So, which some people view horses as pets, but just a different kind of pet. So, and we were also talking that, like, yeah, there are some studies on dogs. The majority of the studies are in humans. I think a lot of that translates. There I don't know if there are any studies in cats, which is not surprising. I've talked about this on the podcast before. Like, cats just aren't easy to work with. They're just nobody wants to work with cats, so of course we're not gonna study them.
Yeah, I
Um,
think if you look at a lot of the research, it's monkeys, right? And I don't think I don't know anything about that species when it comes to blood omega-3, because they look at rats, they look at monkeys to try to get them as close to us, and then obviously dogs. But yeah, we do have some research in cats, but a lot more on the dog side.
my dogs are about to bark. So I say that to say that I think, generally speaking, even though our dogs have very similar metabolic processes that we do. Cats are a little bit different in they have some of the same metabolic pathways, some different. But generally speaking, I think a lot of the research that we do have in dogs and then in humans can be translated, because there is more in humans than dogs, can be translated to our dogs and to some degree to our cats as well. And that list of all of the things you talked about where having optimum omega 3 levels is beneficial, I think can be kind of just carried down through to our pets. Like, probably, if not almost, of these things are also going to be true for them if we can optimize their omega 3 levels. And like I was saying at the very beginning of this, it would be really wonderful if we could just do that through diet. And in some instances, we can, but the reality, at least with feeding our pets, is that to get the kind of sourcing of ingredients to have optimal omega 3 levels, I mean, honestly, it's expensive for us as humans, but it is also very expensive for our pets. And I think it it's a heavy ask to get most people to spend that kind of money
Yeah,
on their pets. It's a heavy ask in today's economy to get people to spend that kind of money on themselves.
right.
Um, and so we are kind of left with supplementation, but then how much do we supplement? How do we know what's right? How do we know what's wrong? And that's where the testing comes in. So can you tell me a little bit more about the testing from OmegaQuant?
Yeah, so what first we'll just kind of talk about OmegaQuant Labs in general to give kind of people an overview of who we are. So we were founded by Dr. William Harris. He goes by Bill Harris. He's just a credible research scientist, PhD in nutrition, been studying fatty acids for probably close to 40 years. He's the co-inventor of the omega-3 index test. So him, Dr. Clemens von Schacke, a physician out of Germany, discovered a way to kind of come up with the commercial test about 15 to 20 years ago to test blood omega-3 levels. So Bill's published over 400 papers on fatty acids. So what we do is we work with veterinarians on the pet side to have a commercial test to where the vet can go in, they can draw blood, and it's a dried blood spot. So very well researched. They can take that blood draw, spot the card with a drop of blood, and then send it into the lab for an analysis. And then, we have the research we have is we want pets to be somewhere, we think an optimal range for pets, especially dogs, is going to be somewhere between 3 and 8%. Humans 8 to 12. So pets obviously in many cases smaller, depending on the size of the pet and how much we recommend to them is usually based on weight. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you 100%. A lot of the conditions we see in humans, you would probably see the same outcome in pets from an inflammatory response, a cardiovascular response, an immune response. I didn't mention that earlier. Is we've done plenty of research on immune health, respiratory health, lung function. A lot of that is improved when Dr. Harris, we published a paper many years ago looking at blood omega-3 levels in COVID patients and people who had COVID, who had high blood omega-3, hardly had any symptoms. Just like those vitamin D studies, when people had high vitamin D levels, they probably didn't have many hospital visits if from COVID. So those that were low were probably more admitted to the hospital with respiratory distress. So we would see those same outcomes with pets as well.
So that is very interesting to me that you brought up the COVID thing, and I remember very well, and I know this is kind of a tangent, but this is what we do on this podcast is go on tangent. Um, I remember very well there was a lot of talk about vitamin D levels, and I remember I even because I'm in the, like, health space, even though I don't like the term and I don't consider myself a biohacker. I don't love that term,
I
but
don't either.
I'm totally in that space where I listen and try to apply what I think is valuable. There's also because it was very, oh, Kimberly. I'm sorry, my dog is going crazy. Um, it was very interesting to see that smokers had decreased symptoms, and they attributed that to the nicotine. Obviously, there's a lot of nasty stuff in cigarettes today, but and so nobody is saying start smoking, but the nicotine, was protected
Hmm.
from a lot of the symptoms from COVID. So I remember those 2 very clearly. I don't remember anybody talking about omega levels.
Yeah, I don't think there's been too many studies with that. I know our lab did something. We did a lot of work with the UK Biobank and published a bunch of different papers from over 200,000 subjects from looking at mortality. So all cause mortality, cardiovascular, cancer, other. The higher blood omega-3 levels, particularly plasma, they measured plasma, but we did a conversion to index levels, which is we measure the red blood cell. What's the difference real quick in that? Blood draw labs that offer a fatty acid test typically measure plasma. They're only looking at your omega-3 status over 24 hours. So that means it's more like a blood sugar. There's a lot of variability in those results. We measure the red blood cell. So we're looking at your omega-3 status over 4 months, kind of like what an A1C does for blood sugar, a much better indication of what the person's been consuming. But what those studies have shown in the UK Biobank, those that had the highest blood omega-3 had the lowest risk for mortality. You mentioned smoking. It was interesting to know the longest lifespans in the world typically are Japan, South Korea, Hong Kong, San Marino. Those like 4 countries typically live the longest, 84, 85 years of age. They all, for the most part, especially those Asian countries, Japan, South Korea, Hong Kong, have the highest blood omega-3. They average 9%. They eat a lot of fish. Um, we average an average life expectancy of 76. So we're about 8 years below. And that's not all just omega-3 related, but other lifestyles. But here's the interesting thing. You mentioned smoking. Japanese folks who smoke cigarettes who have a high blood omega-3 tend to live longer than Americans who don't smoke and have a low blood omega-3. So we know what others have mentioned. I don't want to quote Dr. Harris here, but we've heard some people say, look, having a low blood omega-3 is like smoking in a way. It's the risk factor is no different than maybe if you smoke a couple of packs of cigarettes a day. So that's
Wow.
why it's such an easy marker to get up. And either in dogs, like you said, it's costly. So, what do we do? We're like, all right, I mean, I used to have two dogs. It's just now my wife and daughter and I, but it's like I want to make sure they get omega 3. At least my daughter gets adequate omega 3 as an athlete, as a young individual, not knowing, she knows now what fish oil is at 15 versus when she was 3 months old or young. Just giving her some liquid stuff and go, what am I consuming? Just take it, right? Um, but yeah, I mean, it can be expensive depending on, someone's budget and what they can afford.
Well, I think that's another reason why testing can be so valuable, and I don't wanna gloss over the fact that the OmegaQuant test 1, just in case we haven't said it, you have human testing and you have pet testing. Dog and horse, correct?
We don't sell horse. That's through a partnership with the research
Oh, okay.
institution. So you can get it through their lab, Kentucky Equine Research. So they created their own. They're doing a ton of research all around the world in horses, and looking at blood omega 3, developing optimal ranges and things like that. But yeah, the test kit we have is strictly for dogs.
Okay. But yeah, what I didn't wanna gloss over is that it is not a snapshot. Like you said, it's not the last 24 hours, it's the last 4 months.
Correct.
So, that is, again, like, going back to, say, a diabetic person, you're looking at, like, the A1C versus the blood sugar, levels, which are both valuable, but for different reasons. So that having this, like, 4-month, I guess, is it like an average, or I don't know how exactly how that works,
Yeah,
but
it's
having.
basically a percent average of the entire red, looking at the red, because the red blood cell recycles every 4 months. So this will let you know
Gotcha.
historical intake of, yes, this person is been consuming. So that way, if you don't take omega 3 tomorrow, like, so let's say, for
Yeah.
example, you take a plasma test, and let's say you had a piece of salmon at 8 o'clock on a Monday night. On Tuesday morning, you go get a blood draw, and your omega-3 levels are 10%. It's probably because you ate that salmon. It's looking at what you consumed the last 24 hours. It's not a true, so that person may think, "Wow, my levels are good," when they're really, "Let's fast for 2 or 3 days. Let's go back and get that done again, and let's see what your levels are." Because if you're not eating salmon every day, then you're probably gonna be 4 to 5%. Whereas you can drink fish oil out of a bottle, take our tests, it will have no influence on the results whatsoever, because that's just one day of everything you've been doing for the last 4 months. So that means if you forget to take fish oil or eat food that's rich in omega 3, it's not going to impact you that day. If you Now, I've had colleagues in the sports nutrition space that said they did an experiment. They were like, all right, get my levels to 10, 11%, and I'm going to stop consuming anything omega 3 related from fish oil, algal oil. Plant based omegas like chia, flax, walnuts have no impact on your blood. Their levels went back to like 7% in 3 months, 3 or 4 months. So it can drop when you don't consume it.
Of course, and that but the testing can be so valuable, again, going back to, like, the cost of what this is, especially for our pets. If maybe we are overdoing it, 'cause is that a thing? Can we overdo
When you say
fish
like, oh,
oil and omega-3s?
yeah, we don't know. We have not seen any side effects from taking too much. I mean, I think I would probably not be here today if it was based on that. I take 5 to 6 grams a day. I probably was taking more at one point because I would just drink it out of the bottle. 10, 15 years ago, I used to be on the science board of a very well-known brand for a long time, and they would send me products. So I would just drink it out of the bottle or take the soft gels. But I was taking pretty high doses, 5, 6 grams, but of a high concentrated triglyceride form oil. And I think that's what most people don't realize. You walk into a grocery, oil can be manufactured 5 to 6, 7 different ways, meaning you can take cod liver oil, you can take fish oil, which could come from mackerel, sardines, anchovies are very common. There's salmon, there's herring roe. Then there's what's called an ethyl ester. That's what you want to avoid. That it still works, but that's when you take the natural form. So to go back a little bit, the best oil manufacturers. This is where those oil manufacturers are the folks that have the boats. They're in Peru, Chile, Norway, catching fish, and they catch that herring. They catch sardines. mackerel, anchovies primarily. They may catch some other fish, but those are the three most common we see. They bring them back to their factory and they convert them into an oil, like they whatever they do to go into the oil process. Those manufacturers that want an ethyl ester, it's less expensive, not good on the blood, meaning it doesn't work as well on blood levels than a triglyceride form. They add an ethanol to that fish or that tank in the manufacturing process. So it strips it of its triglyceride form. It's less expensive for supplement brands who want that type of oil, and that's what most of what you see in a CVS, a Walgreens, a Costco. If it doesn't say triglyceride form on the bottle or krill oil, it's an ethyl ester. You can assume. Uh, that's not good because it's less bioavailable. You have to probably take 8 to 10 soft gels because to truly increase your levels in the blood, a high concentrated triglyceride form at about 2,000 milligrams a day is what's going to move the needle. And that's 2,000 milligrams of EPA and DHA, not other fats, not fillers. And that's why it's so important to look at the label.
So, triglyceride form is what you want to see on the label?
Yeah, so yeah, brands that
And
will and that's just the most bio when they catch fish,
mhm.
that form of that omega-3 is in the triglyceride form. You can make a natural triglyceride, which means it's gonna have 180 EPA, 120 DHA per soft gel, or you're gonna do what's called a reesterified. They convert it to an ethyl ester, then they convert it back and reesterified into triglyceride form, which is the most bioavailable way, and it's the most effective way to raise blood levels of EPA and DHA. So brands that use that form of oil, it's going to be either on the back or primarily it's going to say superior triglyceride form on the front because they're proud of that. It costs more money to buy that type of oil from those oil manufacturers and they want a superior form of oil. Now, if you're vegan or vegetarian, you're like, well, I can't consume fish. How can I get my blood levels up? Algal or algae based oil is the only way for, for those individuals. And that is usually in a triglyceride form as well.
Yeah, there's so many things to think about with omega-3s, and I know, again, going back to for the listeners, going back to the episode with Judah, we talked a lot about, it needing to be, like, small cold water fish, like you were just talking
Mhm.
about, these, because a lot of fish, well, all fish are contaminated, the smaller fish have less contamination. Humans have just destroyed the oceans. We because we don't want the heavy metals and the microplastics and all the things, but they're there. They're just kind of ubiquitous, and
Yes.
so we have to deal with what we have and get the best of what we have. Um, also sustainability being important to most people. I think that if anybody is asked, they're like, "Yeah, of course, I want something that's sustainable over something that is not sustainable." Um, and then the manufacturing process, like you were just talking about. So the triglyceride form, and then we would also wanna look at the actual amounts of EPA and DHA,
100%.
correct?
That is the most important because what you'll see on some brands is they'll say it'll have 2,000 milligrams of fish oil, but I there's one brand, I won't say who,
Yeah.
they only have 500 milligrams of EPA and DHA in their product, and we don't know how much of each. It just says 500 milligrams of EPA and DHA. The other 1,500 milligrams is something. So that's a concern, right? So you really wanna know how much EPA and DHA am I getting. And if it takes you 10 or 20 soft gels to get that, 2,000 or even 1,500 milligrams, that's a problem. So you really, that's one of the things. And you mentioned sustainability of fish. Good oil manufacturers, right? We have our own fish oil, so we know a lot about that, the oil industry. All fish oil is going to oxidize. Some, all are going to have traces of heavy metals. Impossible to make those zero. The value doesn't, it's not possible. But as you mentioned, you want to make sure companies that have certain certifications, oil manufacturers, the one we use, Friend of the Sea, Marin Trust, UN Global Impact. What that basically means is they are the top of class when it comes to, finding sustainable fish. And then it goes through an extensive testing, that oil, because it's regulated, the oil industry is regulated by IFOS and also GOED. GOED's the global organization of EPA. and DHA. And what they do is they set standards, when it comes to what do those oil manufacturers have to maintain in order to sell an oil. And oxidation parameters have to be below a certain level. Heavy metal levels like arsenic, cadmium, lead, mercury, etc., all have to meet certain specifications. Or you're not going to really, you're not. There's going to be some problems if that oil is circulating and it's tested at anything higher than the standard. Just like the FDA, the USDA, they all have rules around food, supplements, etc. With the FDA, obviously, supplement industry is kind of like a wild, wild west because they can only monitor so much. But with the fish oil industry, it's pretty well regulated. There's some, you know, good organizations out there ensuring that people are trying to do the right thing. Obviously, there's always going to be bad players at some point that just don't care. But that's why we have a lot of partners. Even though we have our own oil, we have some great brands we work with: Nordic Naturals, Carlson Labs, Standard Process. I think most of them, I know Nordic and Standard, they all have pet products when it comes to omega-3, and they do a really good job with good oil.
Well, that brings up another question for me, and I actually don't know if you have the answer to this, because it's not something we talked about previously, but those standards for, oxidation and for heavy metals specifically is kind of where I'm going with this. Are they the same regardless of if you're manufacturing for a human or for a pet?
That I don't know. I don't know the standards on the pet side and oils. I would think though, if I like Nordic. Nordic gets their oil from a certain supplier. Yes, that
Yeah.
supplier of oil who catches the fish, they follow the same standards that our oil supplier. And both of those oil
Mhm.
suppliers are within 90 miles of each other in Norway. So, four of your biggest and best are in Norway. DSM is the biggest in the world, and they're based in the US. So they have to follow all of those standards. I think that it,
Mhm.
it just depends on whoever the supplement brand is, which the supplement brand will be different from the oil supplier, but the supplement brand is they're buying the oil from that oil supplier. So if they're using good oil suppliers and those suppliers are all following those standards or have to.
Yeah. Well, I get the reason I'm asking, and I'm just saying this for the listener's sake. One of the things that I have recently learned with water quality, with the EPA, we have, standards in the US that
Yeah.
we're supposed to have in our water, though most of our city and county waters across the country don't necessarily meet those standards. But all of those standards set by the EPA are based on a 170-pound man. So if a 170-pound man and a 120-pound woman are drinking and bathing in and doing all the things with the same water, that woman is actually having more exposure because and then if we think about our pets, having the same exposure to that same water being 10, 15, 20 pounds for, our cats, for example, like, the amount that they're getting is crazy. Before I get into the best ways to actually get omega-3s in your diet or your pet's diet, I wanted to go over just a couple of things that I found, study-wise. Tavis talked a little bit about it, but the Grassroots Health Nutrient Research Institute. They actually do omega-3 testing, and they have some maps on their website that show omega-3 deficiency and how common it is around the world. United States and Canada are crazy, crazy common. Brazil, interestingly enough, Iran, India, looks like Turkey are some of the other really, really low places. Moderate would be Russia, China, Australia. China is interesting to me. I feel like they eat a lot of seafood there, but maybe it's not like maybe it's farmed, not very healthy. I don't know anything about that. But just like and hopefully we do talk about vitamin D testing. Maybe I'll have Dr. Katie Kangas on to talk about that because um she's somebody that I know does talk about the importance of vitamin D testing, but it just as important as vitamin D testing, omega-3 testing is also very, very important. So, lower omega-3 index is associated with increased risk for sudden cardiac death, acute coronary syndrome, death from all causes, loss of cognitive function, dementia, cellular aging, depression, and dry eye disease. This is for humans, but a lot of this carries over into pets as well. So there is Sloan Street Surgery is a company in the United Kingdom that also posted about omega-3s and omega-6s and just discussing what the difference in omega-3s and omega-6s are. Imbalances may contribute to chronic inflammation, which is a known factor in many long-term health conditions, including heart disease, type 2 diabetes, arthritis, depression and mood disorders, and autoimmune diseases. So that's an important thing. The BMJ journal, the Open Heart Journal, there is a study that I have pulled up. It was published in November of 2018. It says the importance of maintaining a low omega-6 to omega-3 ratio for reducing inflammation. So this whole study goes into reducing that ratio between omega-6s and omega-3s to reduce inflammation in the body. And it's a very scientific paper. Of course, there are so many studies on omega-3s. What's important to know is that inflammation is the root of all disease, and having high inflammatory markers in the body leads to so many things we just talked about. It's going to lead to autoimmune diseases. It's going to lead to things like leaky gut. It's going to lead to heart issues, cognitive function issues, arthritis. Certainly, there's so cancer. There are so many, and when our pets are obese, that those those cells are pro-inflammatory as well. So there are a lot of factors. We do want to get the ratio of omega-6s to omega-3s down in both our bodies and our pets' bodies. So how do we do that? One is going to be by decreasing um, some of the more harmful omega-6s. So reducing ultra processed foods, reducing seed oils, reducing um, access that the body has to these like highly potent, almost toxic, I would say, in my opinion, forms of omega-6s. We may not be able to remove them all. And again, we don't want to remove all omega-6s from our diets. We just want to get them in a healthier way and in a healthier ratio to our omega-3s. So the other side of that coin is increasing our omega-3 consumption. And so, how do we do that? Yes, we can take fish oils or algal oils or krill oils, or um, there's even a product out there called Fatty 15 that's a lab created way of increasing your omega-3s, because unfortunately, there are some animals, some dogs that just react to all like ocean critters, and that's unfortunate. Um, because really what comes out of the sea is the best way to get really high quality omega-3s. Again, on the flip side of that, we have to think about what type of critters from the ocean, right? So they're going to be small, oily fish from cold waters are going to be the best sources. That's going back to that talk that we had with Judah Veitel when he was with Nordic Naturals. But they really do have the best, and because they're smaller, they're also going to have less heavy metals. They're going to have hopefully less microplastics, which are both of which are huge concerns for anything we consume from the ocean. Now, storing it properly and keeping it from going rancid is also a huge concern. So tiny bottles or gel caps that you can puncture and squeeze on top of the food, a great way to do that. In my opinion, if we're able to just throw in some sardines, some mackerel, some herring to the food that either we're eating or our pets are eating, that is going to be the best source, because not only are you getting the high quality omega-3s from those no, sorry, from those sea creatures, but you're getting all of the co-nutrients along with it. So those are going to be the best sources in my opinion. One thing that I will say that I learned, so I learned as a pet health coach the importance of omega-3s and when we actually want to use therapeutic doses of omega-3s, which are going to be really high doses of omega-3s. But then as a canine nutritionist, I learned that in order for the body to process all of those omega-3s, we're using up the antioxidants in our bodies, specifically the vitamin E. So we may actually need to, especially if we're doing therapeutic doses of omega-3s, we may actually need to supplement vitamin E along with it to replenish the vitamin E reserves in the body. So that's just something that I wanted to throw in there because I don't think it's talked about very much. And I don't think enough of us think about that, especially if we are doing higher doses of omega-3s for our dogs that may need it. And vitamin E is very volatile. It's difficult to keep in food. It's not going to withstand freezing temperatures. So, and it's hard to find in a lot of foods anyway, especially if we're not eating farm to table. If we're anything that sits on a shelf that takes a long time to get to you before you eat it, those nutrient values are going to decrease with time. And then again, freezing, you're not going to have a whole lot of vitamin E, if any, left after you freeze it as well. So getting that vitamin E supplementation, hopefully through food sources, is potentially going to be important as well. So I wanted to throw that in there to kind of tie this up in a pretty little bow for you. Um, Again, another reason to work with somebody who is not just trained as a pet health coach, but also as a canine nutritionist, because we can take all of these pieces and put it together. I have been focusing really, really heavily lately on Chinese medicine and incorporating that, especially with the bioenergetic testing and understanding the results of the bioenergetic testing. Again, something I talked about a lot with Bree on her podcast, the Love Your Dogs podcast. So I hope that this episode was helpful for you. I'm hoping to do more episodes in this format. This format actually came about because I lost some footage, but I actually think I really like this type of episode, and I have been asked to do more solo episodes. So we're going to kind of figure things out together. And what that means is that I need to hear from you on what you like to hear. Do you want to hear me talk more? Do you want more? Do you want me to stick more with just the guest talking? Like, let me know what resonates best for you. And one of the great ways that you can do that, I have never said this before, but you can actually go to my website, thepetparentingreset.com. Of course, there's a contact form there, but you can also leave me voice messages, which is super, super cool. And I've never told anybody that before because I was like, I don't know if people will want to do it. But you know what? Maybe you do want to do it and you just don't know about it. So I'm going to let you know about it. And I think that's kind of a cool way. I mean, of course, if you're somebody who reaches out to me on Instagram, please feel free to continue doing that. I love getting messages from you. But I think the voice notes feature is kind of cool as well. So if you are interested, again, in the OmegaQuant testing for your dog, you can get it for yourself as well, which is just a finger prick that you can do at home for your dog. Again, you're going to take the kit into your veterinarian's office so they can get the blood from your dog to then send into OmegaQuant. But that testing kit is available at wildwellnesspet.com, along with a bioenergetics testing kit that I am just so incredibly passionate about because everything is energy. And we're finally starting to be able to quantify that and figure out what that actually means for us and our pets and our pets' health. So, with that, I am going to end today's episode. Please give your pets some extra love from me this week, and I will talk to you again next week.
Before
you go, if today's episode got you thinking about what's really going on beneath the surface for your pet, don't forget to check out wildwellnesspet.com. You'll find the Wild Wellness Bioenergetic Test to help uncover hidden stressors, plus a curated apothecary of holistic remedies to support true root cause healing. Visit wildwellnesspet.com to start building a calmer, more vibrant pet from the inside out.